Before we dive into this incredible story about Dean Martin and the secret he carried for 3 decades, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful stories from Hollywood's golden age that remind us of the real heroes who lived among us. Don't miss a single story. Subscribe now. Let's begin. It was 1976, and Dean Martin was sitting in a television studio preparing for an interview that would change how America saw him forever. For 30 years, he'd kept quiet about something that happened during World War II. For 30 years, he carried a secret that could have made him a war hero, but instead he'd chosen silence. But on that day, something inside him decided it was time to speak. The interviewer was a young journalist named Tom Brokaw, already known for his hard-hitting questions and his ability to get people to open up. The studio was quiet except for the low hum of the cameras and the nervous shuffling of papers. "Dean," Brokaw said carefully, "we've done extensive research on your military service during World War II, and something doesn't add up. The official records say you were discharged early for medical reasons, but we found testimony from people who served with you. They tell a very different story." Dean Martin went very still. His famous smile, the one that had charmed millions of people over the years, faded. For a moment, he looked like a man who'd been caught carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone. "You've done your homework," he said quietly. "I have," Brokaw confirmed, "and what we found is remarkable. But we wanted to hear it from you. We wanted you to tell the world what really happened." Dean took a deep breath, and then he told a story that would reveal a side of himself that almost nobody knew existed. To understand Dean Martin's secret, you have to understand who he was before he became famous. Dino Paul Crocetti was born in 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio, to Italian immigrant parents. His father was a barber and boxer. His mother was tough as nails, a woman who'd survived poverty and hardship by sheer force of will. The Crocetti family didn't have much, but they had each other, and they had pride. As a young man, Dean worked his way up through small clubs and radio stations, singing and performing anywhere that would have him. By the time World War II started, he was beginning to make a name for himself, but he was still years away from becoming the superstar he would eventually be. When America entered the war in 1941, Dean Martin was drafted into the United States Army in 1943. He was 26 years old, at a point where his career was just starting to take off. He could have tried to get out of the draft. Some entertainers did. He could have used connections to get a cushy assignment entertaining troops. Instead, Dean did something that would define his character. He reported for duty like any other American. He was assigned to a company in the Army Signal Corps stationed in Europe. The Signal Corps was responsible for communications, setting up radio equipment, maintaining telephone lines, making sure military units could talk to each other. It wasn't glamorous work. It was dangerous, difficult, and absolutely essential. Dean's company was part of the force that moved into Europe after the D-Day invasion. They were among the soldiers who liberated towns and cities from Nazi occupation. They moved through dangerous territory, never knowing if enemy forces were waiting around the next corner. But Dean kept all of this quiet. Even after the war ended, even after he became famous, he rarely talked about his military service. When people asked, he'd give vague answers or change the subject. He didn't want to seem like he was bragging. He didn't want people to treat him differently because of something he felt he'd just done his duty. What he didn't tell anyone, not his friends, not his fellow performers, not even his family, was what happened during the liberation of a small town in France. The official record said Dean Martin was discharged early due to a medical condition. He received his discharge papers and returned home to pursue his entertainment career. Most people just accepted the story. Medical discharge happened all the time during the war. But there was more to it than that. On a cold morning in March 1945, Dean's company was moving through a liberated French town. The Nazi forces had pulled out days earlier, but there was still danger everywhere. Soldiers had to be careful. A building could hide enemy fighters. A seemingly empty street could become a death trap. As Dean and his unit moved through the town, they heard sounds coming from a basement, sounds of distress, of fear. Without hesitation, without waiting for orders, Dean went to investigate. What he found in that basement would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the basement of a bombed-out building, Dean found something that the war had hidden from most Americans: the real human cost of the Holocaust. There were 12 people down there. 6 women, 4 children, and 2 elderly men. They were Jewish, and they'd been hidden in that basement by French resistance fighters for nearly 2 years. They hadn't seen sunlight. They hadn't felt fresh air. They'd survived on scraps of food that the resistance brought them, terrified every moment that the Nazis would discover their hiding place. When Dean came down those stairs in his American Army uniform, most of them thought he was a Nazi soldier. They huddled together, ready to meet whatever fate awaited them. But Dean's face, young, open, showing nothing but shock and compassion, made one of the older men realize the truth. This was a liberator, not a murderer. "We are free?" the old man asked in broken English. Dean nodded. He couldn't speak. He was too overwhelmed by what he was seeing. The gaunt faces, the hollow eyes, the children who looked like they'd forgotten what normal childhood felt like. "Yes," he finally managed to say. "You are safe now. The war is almost over. The Nazis are gone." What happened in the hours and days that followed became Dean's secret. The official army response was supposed to be straightforward. Find the survivors, report them to headquarters, let the military handle things through proper channels. There would be paperwork, red tape, bureaucracy. And there was one other problem. Not all American soldiers were comfortable with Jewish refugees. Anti-Semitism was widespread, even in the American Army. But Dean was not most soldiers. He brought those 12 people medical supplies from the Army medical tent. He brought them food, real food, not the bare minimum rations. He brought them blankets and warm clothes. And most importantly, he brought them something nobody else could. He brought them dignity. Over the course of a week, as the Army slowly moved forward, Dean made sure those 12 people were taken care of. He found a former hospital building that was still structurally sound, and he helped them move there. He stood guard while they slept. He made sure they got medical attention from an Army doctor who was willing to help without asking too many questions. When the time came for the Army to officially process the refugees and send them to displaced persons camps, which was supposedly the next step, Dean made a decision that could have gotten him court-martialed. He helped them disappear. Using his knowledge of the Signal Corps and communications, Dean helped those 12 people stay hidden for several more weeks while the chaos of the final months of the war created enough confusion for them to eventually make their way to Switzerland and then to safety in other countries. This wasn't official. This wasn't sanctioned. This was Dean Martin, a young soldier, risking everything to do what he felt was right. And the toll on his body was immense. He'd been working almost without sleep, moving supplies, standing guard, helping people who were still struggling with trauma and physical weakness. He was exposed to diseases from living in contaminated areas. He was mentally and physically exhausted from carrying the weight of keeping these people safe. When he finally collapsed, it wasn't from enemy fire or a dramatic battle wound. It was from complete physical and mental breakdown. The Army doctor who examined him saw what was really happening. This young soldier had pushed himself to the absolute limit, helping people who weren't even technically his responsibility. The doctor wrote up Dean's discharge papers, listing a medical condition that was real enough: complete exhaustion and physical breakdown. But what he didn't write down was the real reason for that breakdown. Dean Martin had just saved 12 people from certain death and kept it secret for 30 years. When Dean Martin sat across from Tom Brokaw in 1976, he told this story in a voice that was barely above a whisper. He talked about the 12 people in the basement. He talked about the weight of keeping the secret. He talked about the fear he'd lived with that somehow people would find out, and he'd be accused of violating military orders. But more than that, he talked about something that very few war heroes ever discuss: shame. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Brokaw asked gently. Dean was quiet for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was thick with emotion. "Because I wasn't the hero in that story," he said. "Those people, the ones in the basement, the French resistance fighters, the other soldiers who helped without question, they were the heroes. I just did what any decent human being should do. And I was terrified that if I talked about it, I'd get in trouble for breaking regulations. I'd get others in trouble too. So I stayed quiet." "But you saved 12 lives, Brokaw said. "I helped save 12 lives, Dean corrected. "Others did most of the work. I was just one piece of something much bigger." But Brokaw had done something remarkable during that interview. He'd arranged for one of the survivors, a woman named Rachel, to be in the studio. She was now in her 50s, living in America, a successful businesswoman with a family of her own. When Rachel walked out from backstage, Dean's composure finally broke. She ran to him and they embraced. Dean wept openly, something his public rarely ever saw. "You saved my life," Rachel said, holding his face in her hands. "You saved my parents' lives. You saved my children's chance to exist. Everything I am, everything my family is, we exist because of you." The interview became the most watched television moment of that year. Millions of Americans saw Dean Martin, the suave entertainer, the joker, the smooth operator, transformed into what he really was, a man of deep principle and courage. But what made the moment even more powerful was what happened next. After the interview aired, the other 11 survivors came forward. One by one, they told their own stories of what Dean Martin had done. They talked about how a young American soldier had risked everything to give them a second chance at life. The Army, now aware of what had really happened 30 years earlier, made a decision. They officially commended Dean Martin for his service. They presented him with a citation for his actions, and while they didn't call him a war hero, because he'd technically violated regulations, they made it clear that what he'd done was right. More importantly, the American public finally understood who Dean Martin really was. He wasn't just a talented entertainer. He wasn't just a smooth-talking performer with a great voice. He was a man who, when faced with a choice between following orders and doing what was right, chose what was right. He was a man who'd sacrificed his health and his peace of mind to help strangers. He was a man who'd kept quiet about it for 30 years because he didn't want credit or recognition. In the years that followed the interview, Dean Martin became close friends with Rachel and her family. He funded scholarships in the names of the people who'd hidden in that basement. When he died in 1995, Rachel was one of the last people to visit him in the hospital. "Why did you wait so long to tell?" she asked him near the end. Dean smiled, the same gentle smile he'd had that day in the French basement so many years ago. "Because it wasn't about me," he said. "It was about doing what was right. And the right thing doesn't need applause." This story teaches us something that modern America desperately needs to remember. True character isn't about being famous or getting credit. It's about doing the right thing even when nobody's watching. It's about helping people even when it costs you something. It's about keeping quiet when keeping quiet is the hardest thing to do. Dean Martin had spent his entire career making people laugh, making people feel good, bringing joy to millions. But his real legacy wasn't on any stage or screen. It was in the lives of 12 people he'd saved, in the families they'd created, in the generations that existed because one young soldier chose compassion over caution. In a world where celebrities constantly seek attention and credit, Dean Martin's 30-year silence reminds us of what real greatness looks like. It looks like service. It looks like sacrifice. It looks like doing the right thing because it's right, not because you'll get rewarded. That's the story Dean Martin finally shared. That's the secret he kept hidden for 3 decades. And that's why, even after all these years, we remember him not just as an entertainer, but as a true American hero. Final call to action. If this story touched your heart and reminded you why we should celebrate people of real character, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We're dedicated to sharing stories about the unsung heroes of history, people who did extraordinary things not for fame or fortune, but because it was the right thing to do. These are the stories that remind us what humanity is really capable of. Subscribe now, ring that notification bell, and don't miss our next incredible story. Thank you for watching, and remember, the world changes when ordinary people do extraordinary things. Be that person.